We can all be great. It's just that most of us choose to give up before we ever reach that point. Some books exist to deliver knowledge. Others, like Can't Hurt Me, don't really teach anything. They attack and dismantle the entire structure of how the reader perceives reality. This is not a memoir written to gain sympathy. It is also not a self-help book trying to sell you a quick success formula. Can't Hurt Me is a confrontational text in which the author doesn't stand outside his life as an observer. He wades deep into the mud of failure, violence, trauma, and stupidity to prove one thing most of us avoid facing. Willpower is not a gift, it is a byproduct of hitting rock bottom. Goggins, someone who was beaten so badly he suffered chronic insomnia, who was so bad at school he cheated on elementary math tests, who was so obese he couldn't see his own feet, did not overcome his fate. He stole back the right to define himself from fate's hands through discipline that burns, through absurd challenges, and most importantly, through daring to stare directly at the worst version of himself without looking away. Goggins's writing style is not flowery. It doesn't even try to be exemplary. It is raw, brutal, like the voice of someone who no longer has any patience for compromise. And precisely because of that, it reaches places that most inspirational works can never touch: painful, excruciating honesty. Can't Hurt Me does not teach you how to succeed. It forces you to rip open every rotten corner of yourself. And if you are brave enough not to walk away midway, you may rediscover a version of yourself you lost long ago, back when you didn't yet know fear. We encourage listeners to buy and read the book to fully experience its content. But for now, let's begin together. Chapter 1: I Should Have Disappeared Long Ago. I grew up in what people call paradise: white house, green lawn, garage full of luxury cars. From the outside, it looked like I was living in an American family TV show. But the truth was my hell lived at the corner of Paradise Road, where my father, Trunnis, used his belt to teach me what fear felt like. My mother tried to wipe blood off the floor with wet towels before the neighbors could see. I was 6 years old. Every night until midnight I worked at the roller skating rink my father owned. My brother and I served like slaves. I sorted skates, sprayed deodorizer, picked up trash, mopped floors. My brother sold popcorn and hot dogs. My mother cooked dinner on 2 electric burners set on the office floor. The food might have tasted good, but it never tasted like family. After the disco music started, my father stepped into the DJ booth like a king. I hid in the chemical storage room that reeked of hair products. School was the only place I got a break, but not really rest. I fell asleep on desks, got woken by teachers, tried to hide bruises by never wearing short sleeves. I feared adults' eyes, feared questions, feared being seen, yet at the same time I wished someone would ask. No one ever did. They just saw a happy black family living in a rich neighborhood and treated us like a display piece: beautiful, clean, fake. My father controlled everything: money, work, freedom, sleep, even my mother's beliefs. He never married her, so she would have no rights, no bank account, no documents, no voice. He could slap her in front of me and no one outside would know. Once he dragged her down the stairs by her hair from the 2nd floor and beat her with the belt until her face was covered in blood. I screamed and tried to stop him. I weighed 30 kilograms. He weighed 3 times that. In that moment I didn't think about consequences, I just saw a child exploding with hate. Police came. They saw the bright house, nice clothes, and left like nothing happened. My father smiled, told them my mother threw a candle holder at his head because she was spoiled. They believed him. I learned one thing: no one is coming to save us. No one. So when my mother started planning to escape, I said nothing. She sweet-talked him into signing for a credit card, pretended to be gentle, prepared for the day we'd leave. One morning while he was still drunk, she said, "Kids, I'm leaving. Come with me or stay, your choice." I ran upstairs, grabbed a trash bag, and started stuffing clothes inside. No thinking, no hesitation, just relief, like swimming out of a lake that had nearly drowned me 1,000 times. We hid in a friend's garage. Betty waited until he drove off in the wrong direction, then hit the highway toward Indiana. My mother's hand shook on the wheel. The old van smoked black. It broke down near Erie. She cried, called Betty, said she wanted to go back. Betty said, no. Fix the van tomorrow and keep going. Don't go back. We slept in a cheap hotel conference room, fold-out beds, fluorescent lights, office carpet. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel pitiful. I felt free. We reached Brazil, Indiana before sunrise. My grandparents' old wooden house felt like a quiet fortress. I repeated second grade with an elderly nun, Sister Catherine. She didn't smile, didn't comfort, but she taught me to read letter by letter, page by page, with astonishing patience. She didn't care why I was behind, she only cared that I had to learn. And I did, by rewriting sentences over and over like a child relearning language. We lived in a 600-square-foot apartment, rent $70 per month, government assistance. One night the fridge was empty, car almost out of gas. My mother pulled out 2 jars full of pennies. We counted every coin, got enough for gas, eggs, electric bill. That night we ate burgers at a diner like we'd won the lottery, not because of the food, but because of the feeling of self-reliance. But memory doesn't erase easily. I started learning how to fake normal, fake being smart, fake being happy, fake like nothing happened. I cheated on tests, copied friends, wrote my name on other people's papers. Slowly I became expert at being a shadow. Once I wore my Boy Scout uniform to school. I was proud. My mother was proud. My father made me take it off and dragged me to Batavia Downs racetrack to watch him gamble all day. I stood there among hundreds of adults in my Scout uniform, looking like a joke. And I knew my life had been stolen. As a child I had no words for trauma, so I learned to fight. I let my brother punch my face, kick my stomach, and I screamed, hit harder. You can't hurt me. I wet the bed every night. I felt like both victim and warrior trapped in a child's body. At 8 my mother got a new boyfriend, a kind, polite Air Force man. He didn't hit her, didn't control us, didn't yell. He was quiet, hardworking, occasionally told awkward jokes. He couldn't replace my father in my heart. But he showed me life was possible without bracing for a punch at any moment. I still had nightmares about my father. Still wet the bed. I hid wet sheets, washed them before my mother saw. I lived like an invisible person, afraid that if I became too good, my father would find out and take me back. I learned not to stand out. If I had to race, I slowed down on purpose. If I had to read aloud, I pretended to forget. I was better than I let on, but I didn't dare let anyone know. In 3rd grade I misspelled my own name on a test. The teacher thought I was intellectually disabled. They called my mother, suggested special education. My mother refused. She knew I wasn't stupid, just deeply wounded. She hired a tutor, forced me to relearn from scratch. I struggled with simple words, hated books, hated letters, hated myself for not understanding 2nd grade reading. Once I saw a truly disabled child in the special class smile at me. I looked at him, then at myself in the mirror. I saw no difference. That terrified me. I started believing I really wasn't smart. And when you believe that, it becomes true. Not because you're dumb, but because you stopped fighting. I lived in a mix of self-hatred and fear of being exposed. Every time my mother was praised as a resilient parent, I felt ashamed because I knew she was strong, and I was weak. She fought. I ran. I became an emotionless wall, no expectations, no dreams. My childhood wasn't a string of memories. It was cracked land full of holes I had to dodge with every step. And in that journey I realized one thing: I was being controlled by a past I didn't choose. Statistically I should have been just another number, a black kid raised in violence, illiteracy, poverty, no father. All data said I would end up addicted, in prison, or dead early. But I'm here telling this story not because I'm special, but because at some point I stopped and asked, what if I'm not a victim? When you start questioning fate, fate stops being chains. It becomes only a whisper. And if you're stubborn enough, you can scream louder than it. That's why I wrote challenge number 1. List every bad card life dealt you: poverty, loss, abuse, illness, betrayal, abandonment, humiliation. Write them like you're confessing to yourself. Then look straight at that list and say, I'm still here. As long as you're breathing, you still have the right to fight back. Life doesn't care how much you've suffered. It doesn't care how many times you were beaten, how many times your parents left you. Life only responds to your choices. If you choose to endure, it will crush you. If you choose to stand back up, it will watch. I began the journey to become someone else by accepting that I was broken, no excuses, no self-pity. Only truth. And from there, I started rebuilding piece by piece. Chapter 2: The Brutal Truth. There are truths so ugly that, if you're good enough, you can avoid them your entire life. You can lie to yourself with endless excuses. You can build an entirely new identity just to run from what you know deep down is true about yourself. And that's exactly what I did. After escaping my father, my mother tried to rebuild from ashes. She went back to school, worked in a hospital operating room. Her new boyfriend, the Air Force man, moved in with us. On the surface, life looked stable. But inside, I was shattered in ways no one could see. I learned to live like a ghost, quiet, never bothering anyone, never letting anyone get close. I grew up terrified of being truly seen, because if anyone looked inside, they'd find a stupid, scared, weak, filthy kid. I was terrible at school. I cheated on every test, peeked at neighbors' papers, wrote answers on my sleeves, hid cheat sheets in my socks. I didn't study to understand, I studied to survive. My head had no room for math, science, or literature. It was full of my father's screams, my mother's terrified eyes, and nightmares I never told anyone. At one point I started dressing like a wannabe gangster, baggy hoodies, sagging pants, mean mug walk. I didn't know how to fight, didn't know anyone who lived that life. But I needed a mask. I needed to look dangerous so no one would see how fragile I really was. I painted my bike black, drew skulls on it, chained my handlebars, wore headphones all day to avoid talking. I lived like a low-budget action movie character simply because I was too afraid to be myself. I hated the truth, that I couldn't finish a book, that I was always last in class, that I'd never won anything, that I had no real friends, that I had nothing to be proud of. Then one day at 14 I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Not because I had changed, but because I had never dared look myself in the eye. That day I decided to take a test honestly, no cheating. I failed. Red F glaring back at me. And for the first time I felt something strange, relief. Finally I didn't have to pretend anymore. I admitted I was dumb, and when you name your own stupidity out loud, you finally get a chance to fix it. My mother worked extra jobs. I got a part-time gig stocking shelves at a small grocery store. With pocket change I bought old workbooks. Every night I copied notes from friends line by line. I didn't understand everything, but I tried. For the first time in my life, I was trying it for myself. Some nights I studied until 2 a.m. Not because anyone forced me, but because I was dragging myself out of a black hole. One day a teacher handed me a test and asked, "Did you really do this by yourself?" I looked him in the eye and said, "I swear." He nodded, said nothing more, but I knew he was starting to believe me. A few weeks later I got my first B. No celebration, no cake, no congratulations. Just me standing in the schoolyard staring at the paper and laughing. Because in a world that told me I'd never amount to anything, a single B was proof I wasn't doomed for life. The score didn't matter. What mattered was that I had finally dared to look at the truth. I had admitted I was lazy, stupid, weak. And from that moment, I started fighting. Truth doesn't hurt you. Avoiding it does. But truth isn't only in books. It's in every breath. When I woke up and asked, "Who am I?" I saw a boy who couldn't run a full block without gasping. A boy who hated his own reflection so much he never looked in the mirror longer than 3 seconds. I was fat, nearly 300 pounds, short, and ate fried chicken and donuts like they were antidepressants. No one had to tell me I was a useless fat slob. I told myself every single day. But something strange happens when you hit bottom. You finally have room to stand up. My first foothold came one winter afternoon watching TV. Navy SEALs on screen, black dive gear, climbing warships at night. No complaints, no hesitation. They looked like creatures from another world where fear didn't exist. My heart pounded. I thought, that's what a man looks like. Right then I knew I didn't want to be another fat black kid living a quiet, mediocre life, go to work, come home, watch TV, sleep, die. I wanted to know how far I could go if I stopped lying to myself. But wanting to be a SEAL is one thing. Making it real is another war entirely. When I called recruiting offices, most laughed. They asked height, weight, GPA, school history. I didn't meet a single requirement. One sergeant laughed and said, "Kid, you're not just below standard, you define unqualified." I hung up, stared at the phone, and felt my heart explode. Not because I was rejected, but because he was right. And that made me furious. I started running. Not far, just a few hundred meters. I gasped like I was dying, legs burning, lungs on fire, sweat salty like tears. Every step was a curse, every meter an insult. No fancy running shoes, no athletic clothes, just an old thick hoodie, old pants, torn sneakers. But I kept running. Day after day. Week after week I went farther. I started push-ups, sit-ups, jump rope. I cut sugar, quit soda, ate vegetables even though I hated them. I tracked every calorie, every minute of sleep, every mile. I turned my life into a laboratory. One day I looked in the mirror, not at my face, but at my eyes. For the first time I saw a spark. Not hate. Something closer to belief. I called the recruiter again, "Give me a shot." They hesitated. Then one said, "If you can drop almost 100 pounds in 3 months, retake math, get decent scores, I'll put you on the list." He laughed, not mocking, but the laugh of someone who didn't believe it was possible. Those 3 months were hell. Up at 4 a.m., running in the dark, studying math at noon, lifting in the afternoon, reading at night. I turned off my phone, avoided friends, avoided parties, avoided anything that didn't serve the goal. I turned my life into a personal boot camp. On the last day of the 3rd month I stepped on the scale, 190 pounds. I smiled, not because I was done, but because I had finally started. I was still light years from becoming a SEAL. But for the first time I wasn't running from the truth anymore. I faced it, and I turned it into a weapon. Challenge for this chapter: write the ugliest, most brutal truth about yourself that you've always avoided. Write it in ink, no erasing, no editing. Read it out loud every day until you no longer feel shame, only readiness to act. Truth is not a life sentence. It's a starting line. Chapter 3, Mission: Impossible. I still remember the feeling when I walked into the recruiting center wearing torn sneakers, carrying a sweat-soaked notebook full of math formulas, with the eyes of someone who had already lost everything but was willing to bet it all one last time. I had dropped nearly 100 pounds in under 3 months. I had retaken math and passed. But none of that made me a warrior. It only earned me the right to stand at the starting line. When the man with the rank handed me the paperwork and said, "Congratulations, you're cleared to try for the Navy SEAL program," I didn't feel joy. I felt ice down my spine, because I knew this wasn't a game. This was where people broke from pain, from fear, from having their real self exposed in the rawest moments. Before enlistment I was still the kid spraying bug killer around rundown houses, stepping over dead rats, pretending I had a stable job. My shoes still had dried rat blood on them. And now I was walking into a training program that had already crushed men far stronger than I would ever be. Hell Week. Day 1, screamed at before I even crossed the threshold. A massive instructor with a voice like thunder told me I was excess baggage and should turn around and go back to my old job unless I wanted to drown, freeze, or die of shame. I said nothing. I just looked him in the eye. For the first time in my life I didn't feel fear, I felt empty. First evolution, 3-mile run. No stopwatch. No formation. Just footsteps, gasping breaths, and the reality that I was here next to the strongest men in America, and I was the worst of them. I didn't know how to swim properly. Didn't know how to gear up fast. Didn't know how to handle cold. I shivered violently under ice-cold hoses while others gritted their teeth. During one pool swim I panicked mid-lap, cramped, started sinking. An instructor had to jump in and pull me out. He screamed, "Useless! You don't belong here." I nodded. Because at that moment I thought he was right. But later, sitting in the bathroom staring at the mirror, I remembered crying in that tiny Indiana apartment, remembered being beaten until I couldn't stand, remembered every time I was called stupid, fat, worthless. I asked myself, did I survive all of that just to quit here? I started writing reminders in permanent marker on the mirror, on my hands, on the soles of my feet, places I'd see every time I looked down. You've survived worse. They can't hurt you more than you've already been hurt. Don't let the past die in vain. I began to understand, the real test wasn't physical, it was whether I could look at myself every day without turning away in shame. There was one evolution, log PT, 6 men carrying a 200+ pound log, lifting, lowering, running circles in the sand while being hosed with freezing water and screamed at non-stop. My shoulders bled. My neck swelled red. My arms shook so badly I thought they'd snap. But I didn't let go. I clenched my teeth. I screamed inside. And I discovered something terrifying: pain doesn't kill you, it wakes you up. Pain wasn't just the enemy. It was the door. On the other side was something most people never see, unless they're willing to suffer. Real strength isn't muscle. It's the inner fire that only appears when you're screaming in your head, "I will not stop even if I die." Some nights I curled up on the cot, legs cramping, shoulders like stones, ears still ringing from cold water. I wanted to cry. Wanted to quit. But every time that happened I remembered, I had survived my father's house, where pain wasn't training, it was torture. If I survived that, Hell Week was just a small test. Hell Week ran from 5 a.m. Monday to late Sunday night. Total sleep, about 4 hours combined. The rest was running, swimming, log PT, crawling through sand, night missions, being held underwater, ice water poured down shirts, humiliation, being pushed to the absolute physical and mental edge. I watched strong men collapse. Some cried like babies. Some quit voluntarily, took off their helmet, placed it on the sand. That act meant surrender. And when they did, no one yelled. Just silence. The silence of someone who no longer had the courage to fight themselves. I thought about quitting too. I stared at my own helmet, imagining the relief of sleep, of going home, of escaping this nightmare. But then I looked beside me, saw another man shaking, lips blue, but still holding the log. I didn't know his name. But his eyes that refused to let him fall, kept me standing. And then something strange happened. On the 4th night, I started laughing. When they made us jump into freezing water in a northern wind, I laughed. When we crawled through mud, I laughed. Not because I was crazy. Because I realized I was no longer afraid. I stopped running from pain. I invited it in. I stopped avoiding exhaustion. I swallowed it whole. I stopped seeing myself as a victim. I became the one who voluntarily walked into hell and lived to tell about it. When Hell Week ended, I stood on the beach, clothes shredded, feet numb, mind spinning from sleep deprivation. But I knew I had just accomplished the impossible, not with muscles, but with something no one can teach, will. That was when I first understood the core principle. To achieve what you've never had, you must become someone who has never existed. I was no longer David Goggins, the fat, scared, dumb kid who got beaten. I was the first draft of a human being reborn from pain, from lies, from failure. And I knew, if I could do it, anyone could. Challenge for this chapter: find a mission that feels impossible to you, something you're convinced you can never do. No one else needs to believe in you. Commit to yourself. Then live every day as if your life depends on it, because it actually does. Chapter 4: The Silent Revenge. I used to think strength was muscle, speed, endurance. Then I discovered there is another kind of strength, quieter, more lethal. It's when you break someone's spirit simply by continuing to exist. I call it taking souls. It started during SEAL training. One day we were carrying that long log again, running circles around the compound in pouring rain. Mud splashing in our faces. Everyone was groaning, cursing, complaining. Me? I smiled. Not a crazy smile. A deliberate one. I locked eyes with the instructor, who was twice my size, and gave him a slow, calm smile, as if I was genuinely enjoying every second of the hell he created. For a split second I saw him hesitate. He looked confused. Then rattled. He stopped yelling. Just stared. Like he suddenly wondered whether he was breaking me, or whether I was playing him. That was the first time I understood. If you can endure what no one else can, and not just endure, but act like you love it, you shatter the person trying to break you. That's taking souls. No words needed. No punches. Just your eyes, your posture, your energy. You make them question their power over you. I turned it into a tactic. Whenever we were forced to do PT in freezing conditions, I finished first. No heavy breathing. No grimace. No complaints. When others collapsed, I stood tall and looked the instructor straight in the eye. I didn't need to beat anyone. I just needed them to believe I could not be broken. Strangely, it didn't just rattle the instructors, it started waking up my teammates. They began standing back up. They started pushing harder. A shivering group slowly turned into something forged like steel. Taking souls isn't revenge. It's reversing the battlefield. When you're looked down on, crushed, humiliated, don't retreat. Advance. Not with force, but with terrifying calm. A smile in the middle of gunfire. An attitude that says, "You cannot touch me." After finishing initial training, I suffered a serious knee injury. Doctors said 6 months rest. I rested 5 days. 1 arm bench press. Swimming with 1 leg. Sit-ups until my abs spasmed. I told no one. I just did it. Then I showed up for the next phase, slow, in pain, but present. People looked at me like I was insane. But I had just taken the soul of pain itself. Later came a session I'll never forget. The instructor ordered the class to do 1,000 push-ups that afternoon. Around 500 most were lying flat. Some were crying. I kept going. Every 100 I yelled out loud, "Is that all you got?" They thought I'd lost my mind. They didn't understand I was playing a different game. I wasn't doing it for physical strength anymore. I was redefining what pain meant inside my own head. I started seeking out the situations that would hurt the most, not to prove anything to others, but to see what else inside me hadn't been awakened yet. As if I was digging through layers to find bedrock beneath all the childhood damage. Taking souls stopped being a tactic. It became a way of life. I applied it at the supermarket when the cashier looked at me like I was some dirty veteran. I smiled politely and said thank you, as if I were being honored at a ceremony no one could take away from me. I applied it in ultra races. When competitors thought I'd quit at mile 30, I sped up. I didn't just want to win. I wanted them to never forget my name. In the gym I didn't train to look good. I trained my mind. I picked the heaviest lifts, the longest sets, the most boring movements, just to forge the stubbornness no one can see. One training session it was so cold water froze on the back of our shirts. Instructor ordered us into an ice pit, then to crawl under barbed wire. Some screamed. some curled up. I lay flat in the ice water, arms spread, staring at the sky. I wanted them to see, you cannot hurt me more than my past already has. Taking souls doesn't always need big gestures. Sometimes it's just not reacting the way they expect. When someone insults you, don't fire back. Look at them. Smile lightly. Say thank you. In 1 second you've disoriented them. Because in the psychological game, whoever controls emotion controls the board. I started training myself like a psychological machine. Every time pain hit, what does this pain take from me if I don't give it anything? Every time someone looked down on me, can their eyes define who I am? Every time I wanted to quit, you've survived worse. This is just a test. And I started applying taking souls to myself. To the weakest part of me, the voice that whispers. You're not good enough. You're fake. You'll fail. Look it in the eye. Don't flinch. Then crush it with action, not affirmations, but proof. Blood. Sweat. Doing exactly what that voice says you can't. I'm not superhuman. I'm not special. I just decided no one, not even me, gets to tell me what I cannot do. Challenge for this chapter. Find someone or something that once made you feel small, worthless, or inadequate. Then use your actions, not confrontation, not drama, to take its soul. Live like you have nothing left to lose. Because when you truly believe that, no one can ever make you flinch again. Chapter 5, I armored my mind. You can train muscles. You can lift weights, run miles, swim laps. You can turn your body into a machine. But if your mind is weak, everything collapses the moment the weather turns brutal, the moment life pushes you to the edge, the moment pain arrives without warning. That's why I needed something more important than anything else, a mental shield. I started building it in silence when I was still a little boy getting beaten in the dark. Back then I didn't have a name for it. But every time I stood up after a whipping, every time I walked into class with a broken body and still tried to read the board, I was laying the first layers of steel. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't the to tough it out people usually talk about. It was a quiet decision, no one else gets to define my limits. After Hell Week I thought things would get easier. I was wrong. The next phases were brutal in a different way, quieter, more merciless. Every mistake had real consequences. You had to make split-second decisions while your heart hammered and your brain fogged from sleep deprivation. I started realizing very clearly, physical fitness is no longer enough. I needed a mind that could not be pierced. Every morning I woke up before everyone else. Ran in pitch-black darkness, not for performance stats, but to check whether my will was still intact or already rotting. I no longer trained to get stronger. I trained to keep a promise to myself, you will not fold. Not today. When people said you're too good, I didn't thank them. I stepped back. Because I knew if I let praise slip inside, if I let myself believe I was already good enough, cracks would form from within. Praise is anesthesia, and I refused to be numbed. That was also when I returned to the most painful memories of my life. I called it the control panel, an imaginary dashboard I built inside my head, where I stored every moment I was hurt, every humiliation, every time I thought I would die. Before sleep I didn't daydream about victory. I rewound the failures. I closed my eyes and relived my father whipping my back with the belt. I heard again the teacher's voice saying I had neurological problems. I remembered the policeman's eyes looking at me like trash. I didn't do it to torture myself. I did it to inject myself with antibodies against anyone or anything that would ever try to push me down again. Pain is not the enemy. It is the most silent, fairest trainer there is. And if I dared sit with it every single day, it could no longer control me. Whenever a new challenge came, an impossible PT session, a mission too complex, a harsh commander, I opened the control panel. I looked back at the places where I had been crushed and said, if I survived that, this place is nothing. Do you know why most people never reach what they want? Not because they're not smart enough. Not because they are not talented enough, but because they never prepare for the underwater currents inside their own minds. I've met people far more gifted, stronger, faster, more tactical than me. But when failure hit, they shattered. They had everything until they realized willpower doesn't come from winning. It is forged in the most bitter defeats. That's why I never erase the worst memories. I keep them like shards of broken glass carried in my pocket. Every time I reach in, it hurts, but it also reminds me I once had nothing and I still survived. During one underwater training evolution, I hated water, because as a kid my father once held my head under the bathwater when I spilled food. Water had become trauma. But to become a seal I had to face it. I swam at night, in freezing black water, no lights, no guide. My heartbeat sounded like it was trying to punch through my chest one last time. I wanted to surface, to breathe, to quit. But I whispered inside, "Where's your shield? Pull it out." I visualized the control panel. The night my father dragged me out of bed in the rain and threw me down the stairs. The mornings I picked up pennies so my mother could buy gas. I dove deeper, not to escape fear, but to challenge it to the absolute limit. And when I finally broke the surface, that first breath wasn't oxygen. It was proof. Proof that I was no longer afraid of myself. Most people live their whole lives as warriors who never went to war. They read books, study theory, talk about discipline, talk about self-improvement. But the moment the wind flips the roof, they're the first to run. Because they never built a real mental shield. That shield cannot be bought. No one can give it to you. You have to forge it from failure, temper it in pain, hammer it with discipline, and polish it with brutal honesty toward yourself. I'm not an optimist. I don't believe everything will be fine. I believe everything will get worse, and that's exactly when you have to become stronger. I set my alarm for 4 a.m. every day, not to impress anyone, but to tell myself, you control the start of today, even while the rest of the world is still asleep. I don't listen to music when I train. I don't post photos when I run. I don't need anyone's validation. Because what I'm building, I build from the inside, and the only one who sees it is me. Challenge for this chapter. Start building your own shield. Write down the moments that broke you and return to them regularly. Not to torment yourself, but to remind yourself that is where you were forged. Every day do one thing that makes you uncomfortable, not for the result, but to keep your promise to yourself. Because a mental shield is not made from opportunities. It is forged from the moments when you had no choice but to keep moving forward. Chapter 6, not for the trophy, not for fame, not for money. One time, after finishing a 100-mile ultra race, I received a small round medal on a red ribbon, handed over with smiles, handshakes, photos, applause. When I walked away from the crowd, got in the car, closed the door, I sat in silence. That shiny medal didn't make me feel anything. Because I didn't run 100 miles for a piece of metal. I ran to reclaim the parts of myself I had lost during all those years of living like a shadow. People ask me, Goggins, why do you keep torturing yourself? You already finished, why train more? You already won, why do you keep going? They don't understand. For them the goal is the prize, the medal, the title. For me the goal is reaching the point where I know for certain that fear no longer controls me. Because I used to be the one who ran away. Used to be the fat kid hiding inside oversized hoodies. Used to be the child hiding bruises behind a forced smile. And I know the biggest trap in life is not poverty, not lack of education, it's living below your true standard. I started entering ultra-endurance races not because I loved sport, but because I wanted to test myself. Do the limits I think I have actually exist? My first race was Badwater 135, one of the harshest races on Earth, 135 miles through Death Valley, California, in temperatures over 50 degrees Celsius 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Most people have a support crew, a van, nutrition strategy. I had an old van and a few bottles of water. I didn't win that race. But I finished. And I remember crossing the line, people looked at me like I'd just returned from another planet. Feet swollen, toenails falling off, urine mixed with blood, heart rhythm all over the place, but my head felt light. Because I knew a piece of the weak person inside me had died on that course. From then on I stopped chasing trophies. I chased pain I had never touched before. I chose races my body protested against from the very first second. Every race became like going to find the person who stole my childhood, and every step was a punch in his face. Once I ran 3 ultramarathons in 3 consecutive days. Slept in the car. Ate instant noodles. Soaked my feet in ice water. Every morning I woke up feeling like I'd been run over by a truck, yet I still laced up and stepped out. You'll ask, for what? To prove to myself that pain is not a reason to stop. It's a signal you're heading in the right direction. Because after everything, no trophy, no medal, no certificate can ever fill the hole in the heart of someone who once lost themselves. Only the voluntary journey back through pain can do that. Another time I ran a 24-hour race looping around a park to raise money for the family of a fallen teammate. I barely prepared. Freezing wind. Cutting cold. Passers-by looked at me like I was insane. Some clapped. Some shook their heads. I just kept running. After 80 miles my knees were balloons, feet blistered raw, eyes stinging from sweat salt, heart ready to explode. While I stopped to drink, a stranger came up and asked, "What are you racing for?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, looked at my shaking hands, then said slowly, "I'm running to clean the garbage out of my mind." He laughed, thought I was joking. I wasn't. Because every time I throw myself into something that seems completely unreasonable, I'm washing away the cowardice hidden behind excuses that most people never even see. We're programmed from childhood to chase rewards. Good grades praise. Good work raise. Good behavior approval. Every effort points toward a prize. But real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes you give everything and still fail. Sometimes you sacrifice it all and no one notices. Sometimes you run 100 miles and still feel just as alone as when you started. And if your reason isn't deeper than any external reward, you'll quit. It's precisely in those moments, no witnesses, no audience, no clear finish line, that you finally discover who you are. I don't run to beat other people. I run to dig deeper, to knock on the darkest doors inside myself, to find out what's still left untested by fire. Whenever I want to stop, I ask myself one question. What are you running for? If the answer is a medal, I stop. But if it's purification, rebirth, inner freedom, I clench my teeth and take one more step, even if it's the only one left. Pain didn't teach me how to endure. It taught me how to look straight into my own nature. Challenge for this chapter. Remove rewards from the equation. Choose a challenge so big you can't pretend anymore. Then throw yourself into it, not for anyone else, not for a title, not for applause, but because you know that if you finish it, you will become a different human being. Let your action stop being a transaction. Let it become a ritual of self-recreation. Because in the end all trophies gather dust. The only thing that remains is the person you became on the journey to earn them.